some thoughts on the Giants' third OTA practice. That's coming up next on the LockedOn Giants podcast.
You are Locked On Giants, your daily New York Giants podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, New York Giant fans, and welcome to another edition of the Locked On Giants podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast family, your team every day. My name is Patricia Traina, and happy Friday, everybody. We made it to the end of the week, and thank you, as always, for making the Locked On Giants podcast your first listen of the day, or if you're watching on YouTube, your first watch of the day. We really appreciate you tuning in, and we appreciate when you subscribe. If you're watching on YouTube, hit that subscription button and that little bell, and make sure you like the channel, as that helps us grow and also gets us closer to the giveaway that I have planned for y'all. So please like and subscribe and continue to watch. And thank you from the bottom of my heart for tuning in. All right, on today's show, I have some observations, general observations, kind of like what I did on Monday regarding the rookie mini camp that I want to talk about regarding OTA number 3. These are more big picture things. Now, the reason why I'm going to do big picture as opposed to sit here and give you who looked good, who didn't, is because the Giants were missing a lot of players. And by that, I mean there were a lot of guys who didn't take part in the 11-on-11 team drills and stuff like that. So I said, let me just go with some of the bigger picture stuff and save some of the individual performance things for maybe the mini camp that's coming up in June. That's when I'll probably go into more detail about that. So if there's players that you want to find out about, you want to know how they're doing, go ahead and send that to me, and I'll make sure to write that in my notebook so that when we get to the mandatory mini camp in June, I know what to look for. I know what you guys want me to look for. So, all right, let's get into the items on my list. I have 3 items that I want to talk about. And this first item is kind of a little different from what previous coaching staffs have done. Now, a lot of times you guys write to me and you say, Pat, what are the biggest differences between how Brian Daboll is running things versus how Joe Judge ran them, how Pat Shurmur ran them, how Tom Coughlin ran them, depending on how far back you want to go. And I also look for those little nuances that are different. And this first thing I want to talk about, I think is pretty neat, and I'll explain why. I call it seeing red. and basically what that is the Giants put players who are rehabbing from some sort of injury or some sort of off-season procedure in a red jersey. Now, the red jersey, for those of you who don't know, that's usually for players who are, your quarterbacks or your kickers, guys that basically the red jersey says don't touch them, regardless of, where you are in the off season. Not that there's contact in the off season, but sometimes, there's incidental contact. So the red jerseys are basically a warning to not lay any kind of finger on these players. Well, what Brian Daboll is doing with the players is anybody who's coming off of a surgery or a season-ending injury, he has them in red jerseys. Now, here's where it's different. Whereas in the past, you would have a slew of players that maybe would, were coming off of injuries or surgeries. They would probably sit on the sideline working with a trainer. They would probably ride the bike. They'd be off doing their own thing, running on the grass field behind the field house, whatever the case may be. What Daboll has done is those players who are physically able to do certain types of drills, he has had them work those drills. All right. So, for example, receivers Sterling Shepard, who's recovering from a torn Achilles, suffered late in the season last year. Kadarius Toney, who I think had some injury issues. I'm not sure if he had a procedure or not, but he had some injury issues for sure. Kenny Golladay, who had some injury issues last year. Those 3 guys were all in red jerseys. But again, rather than have them sit on the sideline, working with a trainer, riding the exercise bike, the stationary bike, or being outside running on the grass field, What they were doing is they were working on drills that individual drills that they were capable of doing. So, for example, Galladay and Shepard and Tony were all catching balls off the jugs machines, basic skills that they're going to need for when the season starts. Now, why is this significant? Because how many times have you watched the Giants and a player that was coming off of an injury got off to a slow start? All right. The reason I think for that is twofold. Number one, I think it might have had something to do with the rehab itself. How quickly were these guys being brought back? But more importantly, sometimes when you haven't done a skill in a number of months, you get rusty at it. All right. It's not exactly like riding a bike where you never forget how to ride a bike, but it's kind of like, the best example I could give you is I play guitar. All right. And I have built up calluses on my left hand, which is the hand I use to press down on the fretboard. Well, if I go a certain number of days without playing the guitar, suddenly the calluses that I built up go away. Suddenly the dexterity in my fingers goes away. And I have to basically start from scratch to build back up to what I was. So it's kind of the same thing with what the Giants are doing with some of these players. If they are capable of doing certain drills, get them out there. Don't necessarily, bog down the trainers with guys who are almost there. Maybe they can't run, maybe they can't do the 11 on 11, but, they can do other things. So give them some basic football drills to work on and let them get a jump start on it so that when training camp rolls around, if they are able to pass the physical, they're not starting from scratch, having to build up the quote unquote calluses like I would have to do it with a guitar if I stopped playing. So I really like that approach. It's a different approach by Brian Daboll. Some people will say, well, that's like having a player be limited in practice. Yes, you can make that case. But the difference here, folks, is that in the off season, sometimes coaches in the past were guilty of just letting these guys fully heal before they put them out there on the field. And that doesn't seem to be the case here. Now, if it warrants it, absolutely, guys will be on the sideline. But that doesn't seem to be the case here. It's like, if you could go out and you can, hit a blocking sled or you could catch balls off of a jugs machine, do it, get that skill built up so that you can hit the ground running come the summertime. All right, I've got a couple more that I want to talk about, and they are coming up right after this. All right, Giant fans, we have more coming up on today's LockedOn Giants podcast. But first, BetOnline.net is the only place that offers the best information on the latest odds, contests, and player props for all your sports betting needs. No matter what sport you're into, BetOnline.net has you covered. Plus, they offer everything you need to know for live betting and your favorite Vegas casino games. Head on over to betonline.net today to learn more about the trends and the action. BetOnline, where the game starts. All right, Giant fans, welcome back to the LockedOn Giants podcast. I'm Patricia Traina, and it is Friday. We're going over the OTA number 3, more or less general takeaways. I'm not going into the specifics just yet because let's get a little closer to the mini camp when the players, maybe we have more players that are healthy and able to participate in the mini camp. Tends to resemble more of a training camp practice minus the hitting. So at that point, I'll be able to maybe go into specifics with players and whatnot. So hope you enjoy this show all the same. I've got 2 more points I want to talk about, 2 big takeaways, if you will, from the grand scheme of things. And before I get to those, just real quick, next week, I still have a couple of shows that I pre-taped with our Locked On College hosts regarding the draft picks. So I want to run those next week. I'm also thinking about doing a live show at some point next week with the entertainer. I've got to reach out and see if he's available. But if I do a live show, I'm thinking I might do that next Friday. I'll keep you posted. That'll be on the YouTube message boards, the community forums for this channel. And also I'll mention it for those of you who aren't on YouTube. I'll mention it, of course, in the audio, which is the same thing. You get the same audio that on the Apple and Google Play platforms and whatever audio platforms you're using, it's the same audio that you get over on YouTube. So the only difference, obviously, is you don't get to see me on the audio platforms, but that's okay. All right. So let's get back to the points. I want to go to another point here. And this is something that Brian Dable mentioned regarding Daniel Jones. And I want to talk about this. Basically, actually, let me back up a little bit here. When you think of practice, the idea of practice is to perfect whatever it is you're trying to work on so that when it counts, when you have to perform it for real, you've eliminated all your mistakes. And I thought what's really interesting about what Brian Dable is doing with Daniel Jones is he's basically almost encouraging him to make mistakes. All right. Now, I'm going to paraphrase what was said, but basically, if you remember the first few years of Daniel Jones's tenure here with the Giants, he often threw the ball into tight windows and windows that didn't exist. It was almost like, you sat there and you said, what are you looking at? His post-snap reads were just really, head scratchers. So Brian Dable has come in and he's basically said to Daniel Jones, and I paraphrase here, Daniel, just sling it away and don't worry about, throwing an interception. Just get a feel for it. Right. And that's in an effort to help build up Daniel Jones's confidence, because how many times have we seen Daniel Jones in the past drop back with the ball? And I'm going to use the expression. I love this expression, burp the baby. He's patting the ball. And in doing so, he hesitates and the ball comes out of his hands too late. And it's either thrown behind a receiver or a defender, because the ball is thrown so late, is able to jump the throw and pick it off. So what Brian Dable is trying to encourage with Daniel Jones is he's trying to get that timer clock in Daniel's head to speed up a little bit, because a lot of times that clock was off and you could see it with when Daniel released that ball. All right. The timing patterns they weren't there for him. But more importantly, he wants him to build up some calluses, if you will. All right. So in other words, if Daniel sees two defenders converging and crisscrossing, it's building up a timing. So if the receiver's like right in the middle of the two defenders, trying to fit that ball into that tight window. Now, sometimes it's going to get picked off or knocked away. Sometimes it might just get through to its target. And the more they do that with him, the more they say to him, Daniel, just throw the ball. Don't worry about, repercussions right now, because it's practice. It's the spring. We'll worry about polishing everything up later on in the year, the summer. The more confidence I think Daniel Jones is going to build up. Because let's face it, folks, there were times when Daniel he did not look very confident throwing the ball. He was putting it up for grabs. You just sat there and you were pulling your hair out saying, what are you doing, dude? So now you look at Daniel Jones and what Brian Dable is trying to do. And again, it's a confidence building exercise. It's kind of like, if I attempt to write a technical article, which I've never really done before, and I'm talking technical, like explaining a process, an electronic process, I could probably do it, but I've never done it before. So I probably would be like, okay, am I going to overwrite it? Am I going to under explain it? I basically would have to get used to writing that type of article. Right. And the only way you're going to get used to it is if you try it and you get feedback and, you learn from your mistakes. So I think that is what Brian Dable is trying to accomplish with Daniel Jones. He's trying to build him up a little bit more, because look, Daniel, you look at him and you question, even though Daniel says, the confidence is there, he's confident in himself, actions speak louder than words. And there were times when you can just see that Daniel was a defeated man, right? Between the offensive line, letting pass rushers through to beat the heck out of him, between, the scheme not fitting what he does well. Dable is trying to give Daniel Jones a system that he can believe in, that he can buy into, that he has ownership in. Hence why, he and Mike Kafka, Dable and Mike Kafka, the offensive coordinator, have invited Daniel Jones to say, hey, what do you like to do? What don't you like to do? Okay, so now we know what you like to do. And you're not sure if you like to do this, but let's try it out and see how it works in practice. And if it doesn't work out, we'll throw it out of the playbook. So that's what he's doing. And you'd be surprised, folks, but that goes a long way with a young player, giving that player ownership instead of just saying, this is what we're going to run it. And if you can't, we'll find somebody else to run it. Ownership is a big thing. And I think that's going to pay dividends for Daniel Jones as he continues and develops. Now, if he doesn't make good of this opportunity, obviously you move on to, plan B, whatever that's going to be. But you can't say, in all honesty, that Brian Dable and the coaching staff isn't giving Daniel Jones every opportunity to be successful in this offense, which is why, by the way, I've seen some articles that have come out, previewing Giants options for quarterbacks next year. Let's get through this year first and see if Daniel can, step up. You know me, folks. I say this all the time. I'm always going to be optimistic when it comes to, what's ahead until I see otherwise. And I know some of you are going to say, well, you've seen 3 years of Daniel Jones. What makes you optimistic this year is going to be different? Just really the approach that Dable and Kafka and the coaches are taking with him, combined with a better offensive line, combined with an offensive system that the kid can sink his teeth into. That's what's giving me confidence. Now, if Daniel doesn't stay healthy, that's on him. And that obviously is going to take a toll on the confidence. But I like what the Giants are doing with Daniel Jones so far. I definitely like it. And I hope for everybody's sake, it pays off dividends, because it would really stink if they have to start all over again with a new quarterback next year. All right, got one more thing coming up for you. And this one's more of a concern than an observation. And we'll talk about that coming up next. All right, Giant fans, we have more coming up on today's LockedOn Giants podcast. But first, if you're like me, you love brownies and you love brownie batter. So imagine if you could lick the brownie spatula clean and get some protein in the process. Well, now you can, because Built has a new creation called the Brownie Batter Puff, and it's available right now on Built.com. Built Puffs are a melt-in-your-mouth marshmallow protein bar covered in 100% real chocolate. With 140 calories, 17 grams of protein, and only 7 grams of sugar, the Brownie Batter Puffs are the perfect pick-me-up for any time of day. Plus, they're made with collagen protein, which offers a lot of health benefits. Go to Built.com to get Brownie Batter Puffs today and use our special promo code LOCK15 to save 15% off your first order at Built.com. All right, Giant fans, welcome back to the LockedOn Giants podcast, segment 3. Patricia Traina here with you. And we're going over some general observations and takeaways from the Giants OTAs. And the Giants, this next item on my list is more of a concern. And it's not specific to OTA number 3, which was the one that all the media was allowed to watch. This is more of a generic concern as to the state of the Giants at a specific area, and that's at cornerback. All right. Now, as we know, the Giants released James Bradberry, who has since signed with the Eagles. Yeah, who didn't see that coming, right? But, here's what I don't get, all right? The Giants have 11 guys on their roster listed as cornerback. All right. They also have, I think, something like 5 safeties or something like that. I don't know if there's position flexibility there with the safeties. I think maybe you can make a case, obviously, for Julian Love, but, let's stick with the cornerback situation. They've got 11 cornerbacks, which I don't know about you, but that kind of bothers me. And here's why it bothers me. Not so much because there's going to be competition. There should always be competition. But I just don't get the impression that the Giants have a set answer for who is going to replace James Bradberry And that concerns me. Now, here's the thing. I think if the season were to start tomorrow, the guy that would replace James Bradbury would be Aaron Robinson, who is coming off of a truncated first season. Remember, he had the sports hernia injury, had to miss half the season last year. And, when he came back, he primarily worked in the slot, right? Because he was always a slot cornerback in college. And now he's making the transition or trying to make the transition to the outside, the perimeter cornerback. To me, the jury's still out on him. All right. He's got good size. I think he's got the skill set to do it. But I would feel better if the Giants somehow could get an accomplished guy for that spot. Now, they're not going to get another James Bradbury. I get that. But you just wonder, with 11 cornerbacks on that roster, it's almost like, they have the quantity. Do they have the quality? And when you have that many guys, I mean, my gosh, how are you going to play them all? Seriously. And here's the other thing. I mean, you don't have, at least as of now, who's your depth behind your eventual starters? Adoree Jackson and again, assuming it's Aaron Robinson. Who's your backup? All right. Jaron Williams, I think, has played some safety. You've got Rodarius Williams, who I think, showed some flash last year as a rookie before, a season-ending knee injury. I've got concerns about that spot. I'm not going to lie. Now, will the Giants maybe look to upgrade that spot once training camp goes down to the wire? Maybe they make a trade for somebody. Maybe they scoop somebody off the waiver wire. I could see that happening. But, when you have that many guys and you have that big of a question mark, that to me is a frightening proposition. Because look, the Giants, for what it's worth, they want to improve their pass rush. They've got the guys up front now to get that done. Do they have the guys on the back end of the defense? That's what we've got to find out. And I just feel, it's interesting. I was going to write an article who amongst the NFC East teams won the draft. And I held off because I knew the Giants were going to ultimately have to do something with James Bradbury. If they had worked out something with him to keep him, I think I could have said that the Giants were among the winners in the NFC East overall, with not just the draft, but also with the offseason. I can't say that right now. I'm really concerned about that spot. Now, again, folks, it's only May 20th. It's still early. We've got to get the pads on these guys, which we won't get until training camp. We've got to see them in preseason games. And I hope they are going to step up. I will give them the benefit of the doubt. I will keep my fingers crossed and think it's going to be okay. But I've seen this too many times. When you have that many players at a position where you only need maybe half of what you've got, that means you're really not sure. And that to me is probably going to be the biggest question mark as once the Giants break up for the break coming before training camp. So we'll see. We'll see if they find answers. I don't know if they will. I hope they do. Otherwise, it's going to be a very interesting summer, to say the least. And, right now, again, they just maybe because they don't have the cap space to get in a veteran. And by the way, over on Giants Country, Coach Gene Clemens did an article on veterans that he would, pick if the Giants could work something out with those guys. These guys that he picked, by the way, I think all of them are free agents. But who knows? Maybe somebody will shake loose from another team and the Giants will be able to get them. Because remember, once you put a player on the roster the first week, the salary becomes guaranteed. If you wait until the second week to add a player, now it becomes prorated and it's not guaranteed. So you could swap guys out if you need to. So maybe that's the master plan by the Giants. That, and plus once they start making roster cuts, that'll free up some cap space. How much? I don't know, because obviously I don't know who the roster cuts are going to be as I record this. But as we go along, I'll be able to put all that together. I'll be able to project some of that for you. And we'll see where the Giants go from there. So, all right, folks, that's going to do it for this edition of the LockedOn Giants podcast. Again, thank you so much for making us your first listen of the day, or if watching your YouTube on YouTube, your first watch of the day. And if you are watching on YouTube, please hit the subscribe button and the like button. We would appreciate it. And if you're listening to the podcast, we would appreciate you subscribing, and also hopefully a 5-star review on Apple iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, and all the platforms that you can find the LockedOn Giants podcast free of charge, no less. All right, folks, that's going to do it for me. Have a great weekend. We'll be back Monday with all new episodes of the LockedOn Giants podcast.